Coogs House a year ago. Foster Pavilion was magical. This year, it was supposed to be for a Big 12 title, but it feels like only one of these teams is about to be having any fun, and that's us.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, Bears fans. Welcome, Coogs. It's Locked On crossover. Parker Ainsworth of Locked On Coogs joining before a 9 p.m. Central tip-off between two teams from the great state of Texas on Saturday night.
9 p.m. local time. I'm already drinking coffee just to be ready to be up all night for this basketball game.
You got to practice. You can't just run right into that. You've got to practice this.
Yeah.
You've got to pace yourself for it.
Yeah. Like, what the heck? Anyway, yeah. Put the kids to bed, very literally kind of game.
It's brought to you by FanDuel, by the way. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm Kim Stewart of ESPN Central Texas. That's the teacher and the coach, Parker Ainsworth. And Parker, I mean, let's start with this, kind of what I said in the open before we talk about the actual circumstances of the game. When I showed you this part of the schedule in October, oh my God, 2 top 10 teams, last game of the regular season at Foster Pavilion. Did you think before the season that this one could have a trophy on the line?
Absolutely. And I was frankly, Houston had Monday night with Kansas, and then this one on Saturday. I was like, that's a week that's going to be for the Big 12 title. Like right there, Kansas number 1 in the country. You mentioned Baylor's also the top 10. I was like, those are the 3 best teams at the time, the 3 best teams in the conference. That was my preseason show. And where'd y'all go? We're here.
Look, we didn't hold up our end of the bargain. This basketball conference is weirdly becoming a little like football, right? Because, I mean, no one was shocked that Houston won the conference, but everyone was talking Kansas, Iowa State, and then maybe Houston, and some even Houston after Baylor. I don't know who would have thought that, but some were thinking that, right? With Jamal Shed being replaced and this Coug machine, it just keeps on rolling. They've already won the Big 12 regular season title for the 2nd year in a row. It's a pretty good percentage, 2 years in the Big 12, 2 regular season conference championships.
Yeah.
It's not bad.
Math checks out there. That's pretty good. Yeah,
it's
pretty
close to 100%, about as close as you can get. Right? Yeah. So now going into this game Saturday, I don't know that either team really needs this, right? Baylor, it looked hairy there for a second. I think the win against TCU on Tuesday has them firmly in the tournament. Not feeling great about it, but in it as like a 10 seed. And so this might not mean a ton, but if they beat Houston, it still is a win against Houston on the schedule. But I'm thinking, Parker, are the Cougs even going to try in this one?
Yeah, and what's funny is Houston fans and I have been speaking all week. It feels like anyway about like should they or not. And while we have this hypothetical should they or not kind of question, I think evidence from the last 3 or 4 years has shown that Houston's going to play their guys. And for better or worse, they didn't deter from this last year when they won the regular season by a few games. Obviously, the competition's a little bit different in the American Athletic Conference, but they didn't do it in that one either. This is Houston's, again, different type of conference, but 4th conference championship in a row in the regular season. And each year they finish a couple games in the lead and still play their guys through the end and into the conference tournament. Sampson's really firm on this idea of like, if your culture is built on competing, you can't like take days off of competing. That's like a very big deal. And so like if someone's got a lingering injury, they might sit, but starters are going to play starter minutes. And it doesn't really matter, I don't think, what I have to say about that. I've called him the future Hall of Fame coach. But I got a question for you on that, because when you talk about stakes and things like that, honestly, through that skid they just had, I would have assumed this would be a lot more important for Baylor. Feeling a little bit better about breathing room right now, but don't you feel like the stakes are almost higher for Baylor? Like it means more to them because that moving up to a 6-7 could be a lot different than being that 9-10.
Yeah, that's really the only thing. I don't know if they get quite up to 7. I think they can maybe get to an 8 with a win like that. And whether Kelvin plays the guys or not, like the committee just sees a win over Big 12 conference champion, top 5 Houston. Like that's all they see at the end of the day. And so, yeah, that would bump them up to, a 9 or an 8. And that is worth something because you also run that risk of, if you lose and you go one and done in the conference tournament, which they do all the time, then you're still in the tournament, but then you might drop to an 11, and then you might be playing in Dayton. You're running that risk, right? So that does become an important thing for Baylor in this game. I can't even think that far ahead, because what we saw in the first game and what we've seen from Baylor this year, it's tough for me to be like, yeah, this is what happens when Baylor beats Houston on Saturday. It's a tough one for me to think of, but I guess on the plus side for Baylor fans, who are looking for something to cling on to going into March, the real March, is that they've been playing playoff basketball here, and by the time they make it to the tournament, they'll be playing playoff basketball for 3 weeks. And it kind of goes into what Kelvin's talking about of like, hey, if we're going to be a compete team, we can't do load management. We're not going to do that. And I've wondered this about Big 12 teams the last 2 years after sending teams to the Final Four every year, with a couple of early exits from everybody the last 2 seasons. Do you think – I think of like the Big 12 just beating each other up all season long. And obviously, not to pump your own tires here, but like nobody plays harder than Houston does the whole year long. Do you think that does hurt them, like by the time we get to the Sweet 16?
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see this year, because they're a little, knock on wood, healthier at this point than they were a year ago. This time a year ago, they were down JoJo Tugler with a broken foot, and Arsenault tore his Achilles in December. Juwan Roberts is playing with like his knee getting drained every 4th day and a big like soft cast on his hand. So like they're healthier at this point than they were a year ago, and so you almost feel like they might have weathered a little bit better. But I will say they also have played 2 more conference games by the time the tournament comes around. And that's such a bad idea. They're never going to do it again. Right.
Yes.
So
one and done.
Yeah. One and done. Literally, it's off to the yonder. I don't know they'll have a full answer on that until the thing plays out. I do think it'll be interesting to see, Big 12 teams in the tournament. They look even more exhausted after 20 regular season games. Do they look more prepared after playing that many meaningful games? There's probably some coin there to flip back and forth. I do think Baylor, though, like you're saying, having meaningful basketball for the better part of a month, at least from like getting your mentally prepared, has to be
like a do or die kind of thing. Like obviously Houston's been playing meaningful basketball. They just won the conference, but kind of that like we've got to have this mentality. Yeah,
it's a little different, I would think, and not that Scott Drew ever needs any reason to get his guys amped up. I mean, and we talk about great coaches, and back and forth, and that's probably a postseason, off-season kind of pod. But I wonder if we'll see like the Big 12 fall apart. We also, the SEC is not like an easy conference this year. The ACC kind of is, but no one's going to make it besides Duke, right? So like I don't know how to. Are we all going to feel tired by then? It's going to kind of be a net neutral, right?
It's kind of crazy how we just brush over how bad the ACC's been the last couple of years here. Like they're just not a good basketball conference anymore, and you just don't even hear that storyline. And earlier this year, when the SEC is pretty good, the Big 12 is like it's over. So anyway, there isn't a ton of overlap between these two teams, but one in particular that is quite a lightning rod. LJ Cryer will be back at the Foster Pavilion for the second time since he went to UH. Parker seems to think that LJ Cryer is one of the very best we've ever seen. Let's talk about it next in the Locked On Crossover.
But before we get to that, when games tip off, NBA action, college basketball, March Madness, whatever, there's no better place to get on the action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on fourth quarter comeback. Stay on the action, whatever's going on. You can look for bigger payouts with combining same-game parlays together as the game is happening. This live betting is really fun and a great way to stay involved in the action as it's unfolding, even if you get in after tip. Right now, with new FanDuel, customers can get $150 back in bonus bets If your first $5 bet hits, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 back in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, which is official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
So, LJ Cryer, huh?
So I proposed this earlier this week when Houston had officially won the conference, and he had officially won his 4th conference title.
It's pretty
And
impressive.
4 conference titles. He's the only guy to ever do that, having not played at Kansas. He's the only guy having done that with multiple titles at multiple schools.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, going into the Baylor game, he's like 70-something points away from half. So I broke this down in Locked On Cougs. But I think there's an argument that he's the best Big 12 player ever. I don't know he's the best Houston Cougar ever.
Wait. Is there an argument, or is he? Because
I think
it sounded
he
like
is.
You said he is. Okay,
I think he is.
I
think he's the best Big 12 player ever. I know he's the best Houston Cougar ever, right? Hakeem Olajuwon, et cetera, right? I don't know he's the best Baylor Bear ever. I'm sure you'd tell me a list of guys that. But as far as the conference goes, he's won the thing as an impactful player 4 times. He was on a national championship team. He's, in all likelihood, if he hits his averages, going to have the most points of the 26 players to ever win 4 conference championships. He's the only guy to not do it, or to do it without going to Kansas. The 2 schools thing feels important to me because it's like it went with him. I know Houston is a good program, right? But like the winning went with him. Baylor, we just talked about, is like looking at a 10 seed this year, right? I mean, it's a little different.
Yeah, well, this is 2 years removed from LJ. I don't know how much of an effect that is on that. But
I say that to say that, like, I mean, I think would you take the 15 points per game back right now? Like, I think that, like, I think he is, and I think the Big 12, you got to think about it, it's like a 30-ish year old conference.
Mm-hmm.
The Big 8 being separate, the Southwest Conference being separate. It's a very unique statement, especially when you think about like all those Kansas guys, the 26 that have done the 4 conference championship, they kind of all played together, right? So like they had to lean on one another.
And half of those guys are scrubs,
right?
Like just guys who were on the team.
Of the 26, only 14 started for a season, so at least one season.
A season, yeah.
Yeah.
To be fair to LJ, started for 4 of his 5 college seasons, 3 of his 4 championships.
And I just think that. I think that that's all very impressive. And again, I don't think he's the best Cougar ever. I do think, though, that there's something about this like Big 12 conference as a great basketball conference with great basketball brands. We haven't seen that before. But Baylor fans feel a very different way about LJ than Cougar fans do about him coming home. And so I'm interested. I mean, maybe that's why no one's running with me on this.
Well, I'll address this part first. Like, obviously, he got the hometown treatment last year, coming back when you transfer in the conference, like that's what happens, man. I don't think there was anything below the belt or anything like that. I know it came up again and again. There was some comments on Instagram posts. So that didn't go away. Like it did come back. I might be wrong about this. I did famously say before last year's NBA finals that the Celtics fans were kind of over the Kyrie thing. And I was wrong about that. It was just me that was over the Kyrie thing. And I'm going to say it again. Like I might be in the minority here, but I think the Baylor people are more or less over the LJ thing. There'll be some boos for sure, but I don't think it's going to be a huge
That's
deal.
Classic Cam Stewart. Forgive and forget. Move on.
I've never held a grudge in my life, man. But like, I will say we would absolutely take the 15 a game last year. It was kind of a thing I thought about, or this year. It's kind of a thing I thought about last year of like, LJ was in a better situation. Houston was a better team, but I don't know that like Baylor needed him last year. Certainly this year they did. Like they don't have any outside shooting threat really. The numbers for some reason are still pretty good offensively, but those of us who watch know that like absolutely you could take a knockdown shooter. You would take that in a second. But all right, let's get back to this Big 12 GOAT thing. So the way you're looking at it, Parker, right? You want a 4-year guy. You're not going to take one season of Durant, one season of Michael Beasley.
I think it's just too different. Durant didn't get out of the first weekend of the NCAA tournament.
Correct. Yeah, for sure.
I think that there's some
Kansas State did. I don't know.
Or like Blake Griffin might have played 2, right? Like, I think it's just different when you're like supremely talented, but you're only here for a cup of tea, right? That's not quite the same thing.
Here's my argument, and this might shock you. All right, just strap in. You think LJ Cryer is the best player to ever play in the Big 12 based on accomplishments and being a pretty good player along the way. I say, tired, LJ Cryer is the Big 12 GOAT. Wired, LJ Cryer was never the best player in his own backcourt. Parker, how can that guy be the Big 12 GOAT?
So
he plays with Jared Butler, who I will argue is a better Big 12 player than LJ Cryer. Then he's in the same backcourt as James Akinjo, All-American. The next year, Adam Flagler, All-American. The next year, Jamal Shed, best player in the country. And then the next year, Uzan is the guy that everyone is into, and I was wrong about Milos Uzan. I thought that was going to be a tougher transition than it was. So I could make an argument that he wasn't even a factor on the 21 team. He's got the ring, and go with God. That's great. I'm not trying to say but he just wasn't a factor on that team. So I don't know how you could say he's the Big 12 GOAT when I don't even think he's been the best guard on his team any of the years.
I do think there's something about being malleable and going for, because those are, you mentioned four very, very different guards, right? Like the shape shifting you go with those four guys. I mean, Flagler and Shed are incredibly different guys.
Right. Yeah. Akinjo isn't like any of them. Yeah.
I think the thing though is that he kind of let his scoring. I mean, he's a tremendous scorer, right? I think that's obviously his big thing. He's a great shooter. You mentioned outside shooting. He let his game fit in with whatever they were doing. And each of those guards, I mean, he didn't play point. He never ran point. I think that's for a guy that at 6'1" to find his way on the floor, not running point is not an easy thing to do. And I will admit that I would obviously pick Jamal Shed over him in a one game scenario, right? Jamal Shed was the best player in the conference a year ago. You can run through the Baylor list again. I'm sure I'm probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
Three of the four in the American. I think that the reason that I don't see that as big a problem is because it was pretty consistent, and maybe this is my own bias, that the backcourt he was on was the best backcourt in the conference, right? He's a part of it each time. And again, if you look at the longevity of it going across 4 years, there's some common denominator there.
I mean, yeah, and that's the thing. LJ's a very good player. I'm not going to take that from you. But when we're talking GOAT conversation, I look at Jared Butler, and I look at their two best seasons, and Jared Butler is averaging more and shooting the same percentage from three, which is undoubtedly LJ's best attribute. And that in that best season, Jared Butler also won the Final Four Most Outstanding Player. LJ's not had that shot yet. His season's not done. But I'm looking at this. I'm like, Parker, man. And by the way, the thing that really bugs me is, who my pick would actually be? Ooh. If we're doing the 4-year thing, I won't pick Beasley or Paul Pierce or anything like that.
Okay, then now I'm intrigued.
What really bugs me is my pick isn't OU Sooner. My pick is Buddy Hield.
Oh,
I mean, LJ had a great 15 a game. Buddy Hield had 25, led the nation in scoring, 46 at Fog Allen, led them to the Final Four. Much like the Houston experience, they don't want to talk about being in the Final Four, but they were there, and he was really great. And I saw him live. Buddy Hield, I think, might be the best 4-year player.
Well, and I will say, so they didn't win the conference all 4 of those years, but obviously they were.
That's a team stat.
They were pretty good each of those 4 years. I think the interesting thing is because he is so young when Baylor wins, the Kansas guys' arguments, like Devontae Graham didn't win a national championship, but Devontae Graham is kind of in the same classification from Kansas. He played with Perry Ellis, who would also be in the same classification.
Yeah, so you're saying it's tough to just put LJ over those guys because he has the national championship when he was the ninth guy on the bench.
It's significant in that it's on his resume. I think the other thing is those guys played together, and they won the conference together each time. The big transition for LJ is going from Baylor to Houston, and he keeps winning the conference, right? That feels important as far as evaluating who is the best in the conference, right? I mean, winning, it's got to.
Yeah, he's just trophy hunting. He's just
latter part of his career, trophy hunting LJ Cryer.
Yeah, I mean, kinda, yeah.
Okay, you brought up something that's intriguing though, because
Kirk Heinrich doesn't do anything for you.
Who?
Kirk Heinrich doesn't do anything for you.
I mean, he'd be on this Kansas thing. I don't think he had 4 though.
I do think someone else won in those years. They went to the national championship game his last year. That's when they won.
That was the same era as Hollis Price at Oklahoma with Kelvin Sampson, for what it's worth, and TJ Ford, a Houstonian guy, but he was at Texas, right?
Same Final Four, I think. I think they were also in that one. Yeah.
Ford was at a Final Four. I don't
I
know
think
if
03.
Oklahoma was. Kansas was, though, right? Anyway, I just had to say that you brought up an interesting thing is, are you the kind of person that values like the one Durant year being like, but he was incredible. Like, one, like, man, that one, like, that's a wholly different argument
Sure.
because that is
Yeah.
1 year. And again, I'd be like, well, Shed was really good for that one, but
Yeah, I go back and forth on it. So one of my favorite things to argue in anything in life is the Baseball Hall of Fame. And so I'm one of those guys who loves like a great peak versus stats compilers. And I wouldn't even call LJ like a stats compiler necessarily, but yeah, it probably needs to be more than 1 year, but like I hate discounting a Jared Butler who played 3 years or, someone who had 2 great years in the Big 12 versus just LJ playing 5 and having 4 conference championships. So yeah, I mean, I am a peak guy, but it's tougher to do in college.
if Houston got to the Final Four this year, and again, for what it's worth, I think they get there last year if Shed stays healthy, but he wasn't. They didn't. If they get to the Final Four this year, he's the guy leading the team in points. Does it like catapult him to the top of this list? I mean, because you seem to be disagreeing with me on a Jared Butler case.
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly help. But the thing is, like, when I'm talking about the best player ever to play in a conference, I would like them to be an All-American. That's a big thing. It, like, no doubt on this. If that scenario happens, and even right now, he's right up there. But if that scenario happens where he's the leading scorer and they go to the Final Four, he is one of the most accomplished players in the history of the conference. Like, if not the most. I mean, that's 2 Final Fours with 2 different teams, with 2 very different roles. That's really impressive. I don't think I can call him the GOAT. That's why college, you got to go by season. Like, who has the best season?
Well, and truthfully, there's something to be said about most of these guys that have those high peaks won't be in college for 4 years. It's kind of especially in this pre-NIL world, like that the whole thing would have been that they left. I guess we can talk again in April when the whole thing's over, and if they've gotten to the Final Four and he's the high scoring, lead point man, it'd be a little bit different argument. I just didn't think it was right that the country just kind of moved past that. This guy won the conference 4 times, like, and we're just kind of moving on.
Like, yeah, I'll give him that. It's pretty amazing. And of those 4 teams, he was I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say he's a pretty big contributor for 3 of them. Now he gets hurt in January of that 22 season, not his fault. But he was a starter on that team. So it is pretty impressive. This game on Saturday night, I don't know how impressive it'll be, but we've got to tell you who's going to win and why, because we've got to wrap this show up. That's coming up next on this Locked On Baylor, Locked On Cougs crossover, which is brought to you by Nissan. And yeah, for those of you who've heard the Nissan ad reads the last few days, this one's a little bit better. That's not the one, because that is FanDuel. We're all about the stats because numbers never lie, like how many conference championships a player's won. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level or a Big 12 GOAT level. With the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team plus the gear wherever you go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. So whether you're off exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. So take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. Locked On crossover with Locked On Baylor, Locked On Coogs, Cam Stewart, Parker Ainsworth. We got a game to talk about. I love talking legacy. And there'll be other times to talk legacy, players, coaches, assistant coaches, whatever it may be. But we do have to talk about the game at hand. So, Parker, you think Houston's going for this because this is the way that Kelvin Sampson does it. I mean, I guess I should ask for you, is there anything that you might foresee Houston stubbing their toe against Baylor?
I think Baylor was one of the first teams we saw this year that kind of made the end of the game feel nervous. They cut it to 10 because the press, right?
That's our
And
calling card. Yeah. Yeah.
and truthfully, there's been a handful of teams that have done that to Houston. Houston's press break has been like, we need Miles Uzian to throw it in because he's a 6'4" point guard, but then we kind of want to get him the ball right back because he's the point guard, and that's created some problems against a couple of teams. I also feel like, though, they haven't like run an organized press break yet. It's just kind of, hey, get open and we'll throw you the ball. And so, hopefully there's something in the back pocket there. Having seen Baylor before, I have to imagine they know that that's coming at some point in the game. But that did make me think it was a little bit, worrisome the first time. And as much as Kelvin wants to get his guys up and going, I will say the players know they've got the conference in the bag. Conference tournament starts next week. The game tips off at 9:00.
True,
Like I could see how there's like some natural fatigue at some point settle in. Do you like rile the guys up on, hey, if we win a 19th conference game this year, that's an unbreakable record because they're never going to play 19 conference games ever again. Like
Kelvin could be saying that as we speak, running through film and saying that,
it's not
it is worth noting that I'm sure that the Cougs are really up for the conference tournament after what happened in the championship game last year. The regular season title is undoubtedly more impressive, but when this is your calling card and you want to win everything, I'm sure that is weighing on their minds too.
Yeah, they ran out. I mean, visibly, not just because the score was so atrocious. They ran out of steam. I mean, those guys were moving in slow motion compared to Iowa State in was Hilton South is what they call it up
game.
there.
Yep.
And so they obviously like to get that one back. I think there's also some resume building aspect of like they want to see Iowa State and Tech healthy and 100% because kind of the knock on them is that they won those games closely without those other teams being at 100%, right?
You know what the great part about that is, though?
They count.
They don't put that on the banner.
Yeah,
they
the
do
games
not put
still
that
count.
on the banner. They don't even put a share on the banner. So trust me. Ask LJ from 22. They don't do that. so that is interesting. I find that, because obviously Houston is very outwardly like that, right? Very intense, little things well, defense. So I'm wondering how they handle that. And honestly, on the Baylor side, one thing I haven't really talked about as much this year because there's been a lot about this team that's been disappointing, if we're being quite frank. One thing that's disappointed me is that they just haven't been able to play physical outside of Norchad Omier, even though they have, like, you look at the guys getting off the bus and you think, okay, we're in for a fight tonight. And then you just aren't really. All right, look at BJ Edgecombe and Jeremy Roach and Josh O when he was there. Obviously, he's out with injury for the whole year. So I just see these guys and I'm like, they can bang with them, and that's what happened in the second half of that game last year at the Fosters. Baylor just kind of answered the bell physically, which not a lot of teams can do with Houston. I just don't know that they can do that this year. And if they can, it's Norchad Omier, and Norchad Omier is going up against Jawan Roberts. And as good as I think Norchad is, they're not really on the same level right now. And we saw that in the first game.
Well, head to head, they're 1-1. Norchad destroyed Houston in the Sweet 16 at Miami a few years back. And frankly, that kind of perked everyone's ears up when he went in-state, in-conference to Baylor. Like, wait a second here. Thoroughly impressed with Omier every time I see him play.
I do really love Norchad. I give him crap sometimes on this show, but I love Norchad.
You got to kind of wonder if, his last regular season game, is it going to be some kind of 2020? Like, what are you going to see out of that guy?
That's a good point. That's a good point. Like, he might lay it all out there. I think Jawan is a better player. I wouldn't say like way better, but I would say noticeably. Like these are both really good players. I just think Jawan Roberts is better. But yeah, he could put something together like that, like he did against Hunter Dickinson, who I've said all season long is wicked overrated, but be that as it may. All right, we got to wrap this thing up. Who you got winning and why?
I got Houston, but I got it by single digits. I think on the road, final home game for Baylor, all that kind of stuff. And frankly, if I'm being blunt, I think Baylor needs it more, so you get a pretty strong effort out of them. And so I think Houston by single digits. I think Ken Palm might disagree with me if I remember correctly.
Did you like the atmosphere last year, by the way? You were at that game.
I'm going back too. I loved it. When the Jamal should hit the shot, sent into overtime, I think I was the only one media is not supposed to be excited. I was very excited.
Yes. I had a Coug fan behind me in that game who listened to the show. He's like, I like to keep up with the Big 12, so I listen to you every day. So I was like, hell yeah. Shout out to the Cougs fans. You've got them single digits. What the hell? I got Baylor winning it. 73-72.
Yeah,
they get an and one at the end of regulation, and this time they hit the free throw. And Baylor walks off with a signature win. And it's worth noting that I have this Baylor team as like 4 real signature wins this year, and Norchad has been great in all of them. So anyway, that's Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Cougs. I'm Locked On Cam Stewart from Baylor. Let me know your score predictions in the comments below. What's it going to take for Baylor to pull the upset? How do the Cougs take care of business? Let us know in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe. Whichever one of us is your first listen every day, make the other one your second listen every day, because I like to think we both put together some pretty good shows. Parker, thanks for joining, man. Yeah,
man, great to talk to you. Hope the fun weekend is not I hope it's fun for both teams. Is that possible?
I hope so. I just hope they both have fun. And we will see you all very soon on your selected Locked On Podcast Network shows.